just explain the format of the meeting. Lorraine will speak first, and then Mehmet, and then the meeting will be opened up to the floor for questions, discussion and debate. Just say that the speakers will actually respond to any queries or points of information and so on at the end of the meeting, and just if people can indicate by raising their hand if they want to speak. So just to introduce both speakers. First of all, Lorraine McMahon is a travellers' rights activist. Somebody reminded us, a very passionate travellers' rights activist, and also a member of the Socialist Workers' Party and People Before Profit. Mehmet Uludag is also a member of the Socialist Workers' Party and People Before Profit. He stood for us as an election candidate in the past and is heading up United Against Racism. So Lorraine, just explain, both speakers will speak for about 15-20 minutes. So, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Travellers in Ireland. Who are travellers? Travellers are Ireland's own Indigenous ethnic minority group and have been part of Irish society for centuries. Travellers' long shared history, culture, values, language and traditions make them a distinct group in Irish society. Their culture and nomadic way of living, which is a very important part of traveller culture, makes them very distinct from the sedentary or settled population. But yet, consecutive governments with obligations in line with a number of human rights treaties that Ireland has signed up to consistently fail to recognise travellers as an ethnic minority group in Ireland. The continued refusal by consecutive governments and the current rotten regime of Fine Gael and Labour to recognise traveller ethnicity remains a barrier to the realisation of travellers' human rights in Ireland and can be described as nothing less than state discrimination against our traveller brothers and sisters. In 2011, the census recorded 29,000 travellers in Ireland, but in 2010 the All-Ireland Traveller Health Study, which was a collaboration by the Department of Health, Pavey Point National Traveller Centre, local traveller organisations, recorded just over 36,000 travellers in Ireland in the 26 counties, but in the whole of Ireland there are 40,000 travellers. That makes up just less than 1% of the population of Ireland. So given that the traveller community is less than 1%, you'd have to ask the questions: why are travellers' rights denied? Why are travellers' needs ignored? And why are travellers consistently failed by this state? In beginning to answer those questions, we need to recognise the inextricable link between racism and capitalism, and the fact that a capitalist society needs racism. It needs the divide and rule situation to strive and survive. And it is that feeds the racism in Irish society for travellers. Travellers have long and continue to face intense racism and discrimination here in Ireland. And it comes in the form of racist comments, racist language, violent attacks. But critically, it is embedded in the daily practices and legislation of this state. Although in Ireland, thankfully, we don't have an organised racist movement, the established and deep-rooted institutional racism against travellers is actually quite complex. It's racism from the top down, through the institutions of the state, through the media, and assisted by the policies that create the conditions for racism to take root and to grow. The government policies in the main today are underpinned by a report from 1963, which was called the Report of the Commission on Itinerancy. And even referring to travellers as itinerants at the time, to travellers was offensive. But the report used that language and some horrific language throughout it. But we have to take note of that report, because that report set the tone for policies which are still very active in this state today. And it set the tone for government policies, but also societal attitudes that comes from those government policies. The report speaks about travellers as a problem. It speaks about having too many travellers around the countryside. It talks about the social problems inherent in the traveller way of life. And it talked about how best to achieve travellers, quote, absorption into the general community. So the state at that time seen travellers as a problem that needed to be absorbed into wider society. And that is what has underpinned state policy ever since. To see how this has manifested and the severe impacts that that has had on travellers in Irish society today, we need to look at the stats in relation to travellers' health, employment, education and accommodation. Stats that are quite startling. And if we start to look at employment, nationally traveller unemployment is 84.3%. There is a grave mismatch between travellers' multiple skills, their abilities and their ways of organising their economic activity to the opportunities for actually economic engagement in this country. The distinct manner in which travellers organise their economic activity includes nomadism, because that makes marginal activity viable for the traveller community. There's an emphasis on self-employment and the home and work base being one of the same, and the extended family unit being a significant factor in the economic activity, and self-sufficiency and flexibility all describe traveller economic activity. However, government policies and legislation have consistently negated against this. Legislation such as the Control of the Horses Act, the Anti-Trespass legislation, the Casual Trading Act, the End of Vehicles Life Act, all of those legislations have directly had an impact on how travellers can organise their economic activity and how travellers have been controlled around their economic activity. And again, that stems to that 63 report, where it states that travellers need to change their lifestyle to adapt to the ordinary population needs, and that it will be of the utmost importance if absorption into the general community is to succeed. What we're talking about in terms of the general population and the general community is the capitalist system. The capitalist system that wants a docile, settled workforce accustomed to regular wage labour. And travellers didn't fit into that. Their ways of organising their economic activity does not fit with the controls of a capitalist system. And therefore, travellers have been systematically, and their ways of organising has been systematically shut down by anti-traveller policies by this state. If we look at education, the educational attainment of travellers is disproportionately lower than the settled community. 69% of travellers are educated to primary level. 3.1% continue in education past the age of 18, and only 1% of travellers move into third level education. The percentage of travellers with no formal education is 17.7%, compared to the wider general population, which is only 1.4%. That's not because travellers don't want to be in education or educated. There is a vast amount of travellers that are very, very highly educated against all of the odds of the policies of this state. But over the decades, there has not been any equality of access within the education system for travellers. There is no recognition of travellers' culture within the education system. and there is no celebration of traveller culture within the education system. And in that policy report of 1963, it said an education policy to be successful, if it is to be successful, needs to aim at catering for those who have been induced to leave the wandering life. Induced to leave the wandering life absolutely clearly set the tone for a policy of assimilation of travellers in this state, and that the children were removed from the traveller family, that they would remove and live a different way of life, that they would become like the wider settled normal population, as what it's quoted in that report. And in a generation, a class would be wiped out. That is a report that this state produced in 1963, and policies that they continue to implement. It's just shocking, and it is tantamount to an explicit pursuit of a policy of cultural genocide against travellers in this country, and a policy that has to be challenged. When we look at health, the gap between the health status of travellers and of the settled population is startling. Traveller men's life expectancy is 15.1 years less than their settled counterparts. Traveller women is 11 years less. Infant mortality is 3.9 times higher. Suicide rates are 7 times higher than the general population, and suicide accounts for 1 in every 11 deaths of young traveller men. Absolutely horrific. And we have to look at why. Why? Because the daily discrimination, racism and persecution that travellers experience on an individual and institutional level by a capitalist system has eroded traveller culture, denied traveller heritage and ethnicity, and has taken its toll on the lives of travellers in Irish society. And it's evidenced by the stats. When we look at accommodation, with travellers being less than 1% of the population, it's not an unrealistic expectation to say, well, why cannot the cultural accommodation needs of travellers be met? The Housing Traveller Accommodation Programme of 1998 provides a legislative framework to deliver culturally appropriate accommodation for travellers in this country, whereby local authorities have to develop a 5-year plan to respond to the accommodation needs of travellers in their area. And within that plan, local authorities have to provide group housing to allow extended traveller families to live together, halting sites and transient sites, in addition to standard accommodation for any travellers who may choose to do that. However, in practice, the reality is very, very different. The Traveller Accommodation 5-year programmes is nothing more than a paper exercise. There is no accountability for any local authority for non-delivery. And government policies actually facilitates non-delivery by not having accountability and by not providing a budget for a local authority to deliver on the plan that has been developed. In 2007, the traveller accommodation budget was €70 million. In 2015, it was €4.3 million. It absolutely makes it impossible for local authorities, if they had any desire to deliver their traveller accommodation programme, to actually deliver it. The European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance reported on the Housing Traveller Accommodation Act and the traveller accommodation programmes, and stated the fact that there was no accountability for non-delivery and no sanctions for non-delivery meant that it was actually going to be weak and ineffective. But the fact is that this government and successive governments have turned a blind eye to that statement, and turned a blind eye to the fact that this year alone, 15 local authorities in this country didn't even seek to look for an accommodation budget to deliver for traveller accommodation. And one of those local authorities was Dunleary-Rathdown County Council, who have responsibility for the Carrick Mines site in Glenamuck, where there was a very evident need for safe traveller-specific accommodation. For years, travellers and traveller organisations have been raising concerns at all different fora, from local traveller accommodation committees to national traveller accommodation committees to departments to ministers with responsibility for traveller accommodation, raising concerns of the lack of safety on sites. And those concerns have been consistently ignored. Therefore, we have to ask, if our concerns were taken seriously, would the tragedy of Carrickmines have happened? Could it have been avoided? Whatever the cause of the fire in Carrickmines, the cause of 10 people, 10 members of the traveller community, 5 children and 5 adults losing their life, has to be attributed to the state's failure to deliver safe and culturally appropriate accommodation for travellers in this country. And one thing is for certain, questions in relation to that have to be answered. Even that tragedy still hasn't prompted the government response to provide safe accommodation for travellers. Currently, we have 549 traveller families living in unofficial sites across the country. We have 987 families living in overcrowded conditions. So a total of 1,536 traveller families living in intolerable conditions, which are overcrowded, unsafe, and often without water and sanitation. Water and sanitation, a basic human right. What is it like for any of us in our homes if the water is gone for a day? How do we struggle to manage daily living? Can you imagine raising families? 1, 2, 3 generations of families across Ireland are living in those horrific conditions. And traveller families have been forced to live in those conditions while they await permanent accommodation. Many have given up waiting and have turned to the private rented sector. And some have chosen to go into standard accommodation. But the 2,672 traveller families that are in private rented accommodation, most have gone in because they could no longer cope with the intolerable conditions that traveller families are forced to live in. And that situation reinforces the belief among travellers and traveller organisations that the policy of assimilation, or as stated in that 1963 report, that absorption into the general community is still very much active and alive and being implemented within the local authorities and the policies of this state. A state which feeds racism from the top down. In the days which followed the horrific fire in Carrickmines, we witnessed an initial outpouring of grief and sympathy for the traveller community. But that quickly turned back to a frenzy of racism and discrimination. A media bias that commented and fed victimisation and fed the prejudice and discrimination against travellers. A state that had the so-called leaders of this country from the rotten Fine Gael and Labour regime feeding the racism and prejudice against travellers. When they talked about travellers need to be realistic and willing to speak about the bad eggs in their community. How dare they? If there's any community in this society that consistently looks at the very small minority of, for the want of a better description, let's use his words, bad eggs, it is the traveller community. Did he talk about the bad eggs in the Garda Force? Did he talk about the brutality in the Garda Force? Absolutely not. Why? Because there would have been political uproar, possible public uproar. But when it is said about the traveller community, nobody bats an eyelid. Okay. We need to begin to wipe out the racism and discrimination that travellers are experiencing on a daily basis. And even the equality legislation in this country doesn't fully protect travellers. When the Equal Status Act was amended in 2000 to include the 9 grounds of discrimination, and it named the traveller community as one of the groups that couldn't be discriminated against, or there would be accountability. The Vintners lobby group was so strong in this country that before the amendment to that legislation was finalised, the Vintners lobby had secured a change which meant that the traveller community, if refused to service in a licensed premises, couldn't go to the local authority or the equality authority, but they had to go to the courts. So even the equality legislation in this country discriminates against the traveller community. The recent move by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael once again to refuse the recognition of traveller ethnicity in a vote in the Dáil last week reinforces the barriers to the realisation of travellers' human rights. It denies travellers their rights. Under the proclamation of this state, travellers are not treated equally by this state. But it doesn't have to be this way. There can be an alternative where traveller ethnicity is recognised, an alternative where traveller heritage is recorded, celebrated and shared. Traveller culture is celebrated, where travellers are key stakeholders in decision making. An alternative where travellers' very significant contribution to Irish society is encouraged, supported, resourced, promoted, recognised and applauded. An alternative where the 1916 proclamation of dignity, equality and rights is extended not just to the traveller community but to all citizens of Ireland that are discriminated against. This alternative is possible, but it's only possible and will only come from the mass mobilisation of the working class. So as socialists, it's our responsibility to stand in solidarity with our traveller brothers and sisters, to change and challenge the inequalities that travellers experience, to ensure a society where travellers have equality of access and outcomes, and those horrific stats in relation to education, accommodation, health and employment for travellers, to break down this state that is racist to its core. And until then, travellers won't have equality, and we need to ensure that happens. So to help that happen, if you're not already a member of the SWP, you need to sign up and join and become part of that mobilisation for change.
Thanks, Lorraine, and Mehmet will now speak for a further 15-20 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry about my voice. I tend to get a very horrible voice at these meetings, but anyway. Look, I mean, I will start where Lorraine has finished, really. 15, 16 years ago, when I came to this country, I was told, and I have been hearing this for a long time, and I'm sure you did as well, racism started in this country with the arrival of migrants. Lefties have said that, which implied, of course, if the migrants went away, there will be no racism. But only to realize, thanks to comrades like Lorraine and others, that there was racism in this country, in this state, long before the migrants had arrived, actually. There was racism in terms of what the travellers are experiencing, institutionalized racism and denial. So, as a migrant, as a socialist, as a human being, I think our job, as Lorraine said, has to be to stand with the travellers and to defend and support their demands all the way, along the way, all the way. So there we stay. There, I think we should start with that. There's also a sad day today. It is sad for us, really, in a sense that having to prove to yourself through the events in Paris. Of course, we stand in solidarity with the victims of Paris, the innocent victims, and of course we condemn the attacks by anyone to civilian people. But having to prove yourself that what you have said in 2001, what you have said in 2003, in 2004, 11, 9, and only last year, only last week, is still true. Imperialism, war, neoliberal capitalism with vicious armies, literally dismantling regions, inflicting horror and bloodshed upon people years after years, they will only make the world a more dangerous place. It creates racism, it creates sectarian counter-revolutionary forces and whatnot. So it's sad to prove to yourself, yet again, that what you have said 10, 15 years ago is still valid today. And therefore I think we need to understand that we need to keep saying those things, but I think we need to maybe build the mobilization and build the number of people who are saying those things. It was 2001 when I joined, 2001 to 2002, somewhere along the line, when I joined this organization, actually recruited by someone who's in this room, but I won't name her into this. And I'm glad I did, because only through that mobilization, only through that solidarity, only through that education I'm getting, I can now put into context what's happening in Paris, why is it happening, and how we need to deal with that. So I'm going to repeat what Lorraine said, and sometimes I forget to say these things. Join the SWP if you really want to fight against the things that are happening in Paris, but also things that are happening in Baghdad and Kabul and Yemen and everywhere else, right? See, at times like this, it's confusion, shock, horror, fear, demoralization, hate, and of course racism. Now, I mean, you can imagine from National to every Islamophobic organization, campaign group, to actually Fine Gael TDs last night at 2:30 a.m. on Twitter, there will be a sort of a backlash of condemning terrorism, but in the process, condemning 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, because they will have decided that yet again the Muslims will have to apologize for the events that are happening in Paris. I mean, while militaries of this world and the sort of sectarian response, racist, jihadist responses to these horrors created by the imperialist state for over a decade and longer than that actually, are actually creating chaos and bloodshed, I think our jobs are becoming just more critical and just more important in terms of fighting anti-racism. And it makes really sort of sense why we have to have an anti-racist fight. Because it is not just becoming anymore an academic or theoretical debate to fight racism and to build anti-racist campaigns. It comes home with serious consequences and with real implications on our lives and the lives of millions of people really. And we need to be able to fight demoralization, we need to be able to produce arguments to defeat the lies and the racist attacks on suspicion among working class people, questions, hard questions that we need to answer, and we need to also be able to expose in the process the lies that are coming from our own governments, from the governments of the world, the powerful imperialist governments, so that we can actually go back to building an international solidarity among people from Middle East to Europe. Otherwise we'll be divided, otherwise we'll be demoralized, otherwise our water charges campaigns, otherwise our workplaces and trade union strikes will be infiltrated with questions of racist nature, with suspicions of racist nature, and it will only the bosses, the governments, the imperialists who will actually enjoy the fact that we are now suddenly looking at each other in a suspicious manner. And we cannot allow any of these to happen actually. I mean, the other thing as well, when these things happen, as we are seeing at the moment in social media and in mainstream media, that we never see a headline like this when people in Beirut are killed, or we never see a headline like this when the MSF hospital is actually bombed by the Americans, knowingly and willingly. We never see these headlines when Americans are actually bombing a wedding party in Afghanistan, killing 19 women, 17 children on their way to wedding. We never see headlines like this. It takes them 24 hours before they come to the statement saying the NATO or the American forces may have accidentally bombed a wedding party. But when it happens in the others, when it happens in this way, like it happened in Paris, they're quick, they're fast. The first article in Irish Independent about Islam and Muslims and refugees had already emerged at 2:30 a.m. this morning. So journalists are working hard in that sense, right? When Middle East is going from one bloodshed to the other, when what we see at the moment in terms of ISIS and other sectarian forces and the brutality and the refugees that are escaping from this brutality, from the regimes that have horrified people, we hear statements on refugees bringing problems, refugees bringing terrorists into Europe, refugees are being a danger for our civilizations, but the fact that what they call the civilization here, sending thousands of migrants in army uniforms from Afghanistan to Mali to Yemen to Iraq to Syria, that migration is actually cherished, supported, and we are encouraged to think that that military migration to those places, that bombs the places to bits, is okay. And therefore we shouldn't make any linkage between that situation in the Middle East and the consequences as in the forms of refugees and all sorts of other things. So we are always constantly asked to forget the link between what they are doing to the rest of the world and how the ordinary, decent people of the rest of the world respond to that. We are asked to forget the linkage between those two. But we don't. When you look at the refugee crisis, it has been a long time since the Nigerian taxi drivers are causing problems in this country. Remember, it was the Nigerian taxi driver who was either lazy or taking our jobs. They just simply couldn't decide. Or it was the African asylum seeker who was either here for social welfare or to get a job the minute he got a status. Which one? They couldn't decide. But it's kind of forgotten at the moment because the racist debate and the racist institutional debate has been shifting towards refugees because there is a crisis, so refugee crisis. But of course, when they call it a crisis, they don't necessarily refer to the term crisis like we do. For the European Union leaders, it has been a crisis the minute these people started arriving to European borders. It has been a crisis in terms of how we understand the crisis since 2001, 2003, when there are, for example, still 1 million Iraqis refugees, forgotten refugees of the war on terror, for example. Or there are Afghani refugees in Iraq, there are Iraqi refugees in Turkey, and there are Kurdish refugees from Turkey in other places. That's all forgotten. That's all forgotten. They talk about crisis the minute these people arrive to European shores and European borders. So, and that crisis, according to them, begins in 2014, 2015. Well, that's not really the case. That's not really the case. But it suits them. Because when we start asking the questions of why, how, and since when these people are coming, they're afraid of the answers that we might give as much as they're afraid of the picture of a 3-year-old dead Syrian boy. Because that way, the answers to those questions exposes them, exposes their lies, and it is those answers from which we can actually expose our own governments and actually build a genuine, strong fight against racism. What are those answers? I'd like to drill into it a little bit. The question of what we know is happening. The question of why we, the decent, ordinary people, know why are the refugee crisis happening. But the question of, but the answers to those, they have to hide from us, the real answers. What do they do in the process? They come up with 2 answers. One is the imperialist answer. It is the answer that says, as if the refugee crisis, for example, is the making of the conspiracy of the human traffickers. As if it was just a natural-ish disaster that just happened to happen. A few people got together, set up this network of traffickers, and therefore the people, the opportunist refugees, have just jumped on the opportunity and are arriving to Turkey. So therefore there is no link between imperialism and their racism. The second answer is that the racism generated from that, their neoliberal racism, because the crisis, as they call it, has just interrupted them from what they wanted to continue doing. from Greece to Portugal to Ireland to everywhere else, the unemployment, the housing crisis, the looking after the rich, bailing out the banks, in the process hurting the European people, in the process forcing European workers to emigrate out to some other places. They are actually distracted from that, at least for a bit. And to make sure they can get back to that, and to make sure that we don't actually expose them, to make sure in our workplaces we don't ask these hard questions, they then introduce their neoliberal racism into the debate. The racism of fear factor, the racism of terrorists, the racism of Islamification of Europe, the racism of them coming and we not having houses, as if them not being, which wasn't the case. So, from starting from an imperialist denial, they end up with a racist rejection of their responsibilities, and they want to divide us in the process. So the refugee crisis and the backlash of and the response to this crisis from the sort of governments, from the states, from the European institutions is going to continue. The crisis is going to grow. In the process, they are going to make sure that this debate stays in a racist platform, has a racist undercurrent at all times, and the refugees are going to be seen constantly as a problem. But the European people also have been very good in the context of racist crisis, refugee crisis. The only reason the European governments at least pretended to act, to do something, was of course with the pictures emerging of 3-year-old dead boys, etc., right? Boy, etc., but there have been since many more children dead, was because the European people, the ordinary, working class, decent European people, got up and mobilized. They got up and asked questions. They got up and started solidarity campaigns, political rallies. They got up, organized meetings. And the European governments realized that there is something going on here and they cannot just turn the blind eye. And the pictures and the horrors that they saw, that we also just cornered them a bit. But will they go all the way, and will they do the right thing? Of course they won't. Already they're talking about using the European and the neighboring countries like Turkey or the North Africans to spend billions to make sure refugees aren't coming to Europe. You see, for them the problem is the refugees coming to Europe, not that there are refugees. For them the fact that since 2001, in the last 15 years, the refugee numbers have risen from 30 plus million to 60 million isn't the problem. For them the problem is they just happen to come to Europe. That is the problem. And they're going to do their best to actually militarize the borders and to make sure they outsource the border control of European Union with their racist foreign policies and immigration policies in the mix to other countries, and in the process give them carrots of European Union membership, visa-free travel, and this horse trading, to official human trafficking, where they can deport refugees because they're a problem, don't you forget, back to those countries, and we're not from there. So basically what they're saying is, in their racist quota system of 120,000, we will take 120,000, the rest are going to be deported back. Where they go, what happens to them, we don't care, because it's a bit like the Guantanamo, it's outside of our jurisdiction. Our laws, or supposedly human rights agreements, or supposedly democratic systems of Europe, remember, we are always being lectured about democracy and this and that, don't matter because they are now they're outside of our jurisdictions and we don't care. So, just to come to conclusion, I have a couple of minutes left, right? Racism, as I see it, and the racist institutional European structures, as I see it, are not just about the refugees or the travelers or the migrants or the black or the Muslims. Of course, they are the victims. Of course, they are the target groups. In the process, they are being sort of continuously attacked. But look at what's happening in Europe. Everywhere, when racism has risen, everywhere racist groups could actually hijack the public platform. It was also the places where right-wing governments rose. Or vice versa, actually, they feed off each other. That meant governments who are more than willing to impose austerity, cut jobs, who are more than willing to actually look after their own rich, allow them actually to become refugees. Capital flight is the glorified for the rich refugees, where they can take their money, go away somewhere else, where it's more capital and wealth friendly, and can seek refuge from the public taxation or wealth taxes or corporation taxes. That is the sort of course, the other side of it. The capital refugees are well looked after. There are no borders for them. They are always used as an excuse why they should actually be looked after, otherwise they will go away. But nonetheless, we can talk about it in the discussion. But Look at the European countries, from Britain, from Greece, when Golden Dawn was on the rise, right? From Denmark, from Hungary, where racism has risen, so that the right-wing governments, indeed far-right organizations, and indeed fascist movements and attacks. So racism for us means a lot more than just sort of sympathy and solidarity with the victims of racism. It means our own livelihoods. It means to cut our hospitals, to our houses, to actually cut our jobs, basically take control of our futures and the future of our children for the benefits of the rich and the elite at the top. They use racism as one of the key propaganda agenda. Look at the elections in Hungary, Denmark, Greece, look at everywhere, look at UK. All of the debate, all of the propaganda of the right-wing parties who are more than willing to cut even further, who are more than willing to bail their own bankers and look after their own rich, have used racism as the center, at the center of their propaganda machine. It was always the migrants, it was the refugees, it was the blacks, it was the asylum seekers, and went from housing to hospital beds. It was always these victim groups or the targets that were put forward as a problem, rather than the problem that they have actually created for the benefits of the rich and the wealthy. So, I will conclude with something that I think is very important. Understanding the root cause of racism, knowing that these horrors will continue, at least in the immediate future, and knowing that this is not the end of the world and we can fight back. We can build anti-racist campaigns. We can challenge the establishment. We can still say, open the borders to refugees and make sense why we are saying of that. And explain why it's the best thing to do. Open the borders to refugees. Let the direct provision system, asylum seekers in direct provision system have the right to work, right to education. We can challenge those things. But as part of doing that, it is the world vision I think we need to get back to, or we need to even build further. Remember the moments as they're talking about Muslim dangers in Europe, or Islamification of Europe, or the Muslim terrorists, or the man in beard, or the woman in headscarf. Remember the moments in Cairo during the Arab Spring protest, when they were holding placards from Cairo to, where was it? I think it was the Wall Street occupiers. And they were saying, we are you, you are us. That scares the shit out of our rulers, I think. When the revolutionaries in Cairo can tell the occupied movement people in America, we are you, you are us. And we are all actually Greece as well in the process. That scares the shit out of them. And I think that is the sort of backbone and the philosophy of the anti-racism campaign and socialist anti-racism campaign. And as I said, I'm glad I'm part of this organization, because without the organization, we wouldn't have the understanding or the comprehension or the sense-making of what's going on around the world. But now we do, and we need to just build it further. Thank you.